Welcome grade 11 learners to another installment of Life Sciences. Guys, we focused on invertebrates over the last couple of weeks. Today we're going to discuss the role of invertebrates in the ecosystem and their significant roles in terms of to sustain human existence. I think it's going to be a very informative lesson. Things are going to be quite fascinating, especially to look at how important these invertebrates are. So I hope you guys are eager to get involved. Check out those notebooks. We're going to get some questions for you to engage with, but let's get straight into the lesson. So guys, a very quick recap on classification of animals, and it's just a mere recap. We've spent some time over the last couple of weeks looking at invertebrates, and we said that one of the characteristics of invertebrates is that they have a distinct backbone. They lack a distinct backbone and a skeletal column. So essentially what we're focusing on is we're looking at all the invertebrates, and over the last couple of weeks we looked at the different categories of invertebrates. We looked at the features that they have, and what we spent time looking at was discussing their body plans. And what do we mean by body plan? The way in which the organism is organized. We looked at significant characteristics where we discussed how they would appear when they were cut along a line of symmetry. We looked at the presence or absence of a coelom. We discussed the layers that are present. We spoke of fertilization. So we've looked at the key distinguishing characteristics that we saw developing as the organisms became more complex. And essentially today we're looking at how these organisms have coexisted with each other, how they have contributed to the significance of their role in the environment, and how they engage with other ecosystems. So guys, again, just a recap. Invertebrates are animals without a backbone. And according to the backbone, some other features are classified accordingly. And those features that we're looking at, guys, are the body of symmetry, which we discussed, the type of gut, which is quite significant, the type of body cavity that the organism shows, whether the organism has a segmented body, and the cephalization, which we looked at, was the concentration of nerves at an anterior end. And we said that that was a key feature in terms of organisms becoming complex. Each phylum has its own body plan, and as I said, a body plan refers to the way the body is structured, and based on that we discuss these characteristics in the comparison. So guys, what is it that we're looking at today? So today we've got a few terms that we want to unpack. I'm going to go through these terms, and I'm going to give you a little while to have a quick discussion. So I'm going to read out these terms, but I hope that you guys pull out those textbooks, get into some groups and have a quick discussion, and when we get back we're going to look at what these terms are. So what are these terms that I want you to look at over the next 2 minutes? So we're going to be discussing biodiversity. We're going to look at what is a pest. What do we understand by the term ecosystem, and the term pollination and aeration. So guys, I think you guys can have a quick discussion. I'm going to see you on the end of 2 minutes. Welcome back, guys. So I'm sure you guys engaged in a good discussion. You've looked at these terms, and I'm sure you probably seek the help of your teacher and had a good discussion amongst each other. So let's get straight into these terms. Right, so guys, what is biodiversity? So when we look at biodiversity, we can break the word up into two parts, bio and diversity. And it's something that you guys have looked at in grade 10, and we need to talk about that in the context of how invertebrates are. So bio refers to living, and guys, and obviously you guys are doing a living science, and hence it's biology. So living and diversity, so it refers to the variety or the diversity of living things, and that is an indication of a characteristic of an ecosystem. So when we refer to biodiversity, we refer to the variety of living organisms living in an area. And hence, guys, when we look at the distribution of these invertebrates, we've got to look at how diverse the environment is, and by looking at the diversity of invertebrates that are supported in that ecosystem. So we're gonna talk about that in a little while. The next term we're looking at is pest. And often, guys, we associate lots of the invertebrates as pest. What do we understand by the term pest? So the term pest obviously would refer to an organism or something that would affect the behavior, or it'll cause harm to an organism, to a host. So the pest will basically be an organism that affects another organism. So I know that we often have a common understanding that all germs cause disease, and guys, you can recollect, we looked at microbacteria, we looked at microorganisms, and we said that there are lots of useful bacteria, but that there are also some bacteria that are harmful, and not all of them are actually pathogenic. Hence, when we look at invertebrates, not all of them are pests. There are lots of useful vertebrates, and we're going to explore the uses of these invertebrates. The next term is ecosystem, guys. Again, the word is broken up into two parts. Eco referring to the ecology, and system is how the living things interact together. So ecosystem refers to the interaction between living and non-living with each other and the environment. And that's key. It's the interaction between the living and the non-living organisms with each other and the environment. And guys, we're going to get to another term which is called pollination, and I'm sure you guys had a discussion around this, and you've probably heard about this. So pollination is a process that refers to how the pollen is transferred from the parts of one flower to the other parts of the same flower or another flower, and hence pollination refers to the transfer of pollen. And we're going to pollen from the anther to the stigma. So it's from the anther to the stigma, and that could be on the same flower or on different flowers, and we'll refer to those terms as being either self-pollination or cross-pollination, but more details of that as we get through the lesson. And guys, finally, aeration. Aeration is obviously a process that refers to how when we look at soil, aeration comes from the word, so it has an origin to air, and it links to how soil, is fertilized by increasing the air content, and we'll discuss how this occurs in the soil. So we've looked at some of this terminology very briefly. We're going to get into each of these and discuss them in a bit of detail in time. So guys, when we look at the key concepts of this lesson, what I've tried to illustrate in this food chain here, or food web rather, is to sort of show the significance of these invertebrates in the context of the food web. And guys, if we were to understand what a food web is, we've got to go back to looking at what a food chain is. And if we look at a food chain, guys, a food chain basically shows the transfer of energy from one organism to another and how that energy is passed on along a unidirectional mechanism. So when we look at this food web, it's an illustration that shows how several food chains are integrated, and we see the interaction of several food chains. And what is good about this illustration is that it shows the significance of bacteria. Here we're seeing protozoa, we're seeing nematodes, earthworms, fungi, nematodes again, your arthropods, birds. So if we stand back and look at this, we're looking at the organisms interacting with each other. Hence, we refer to that as being a food web. So what do we look at? We're looking at the roles of these invertebrates in the context of the ecosystem and how they play an important role in the food web, and which essentially means that it's the integration of both the invertebrates, the vertebrates, as well as the microorganisms. And hence, we cannot isolate just the invertebrates and look at their significance. We've got to look at the significance of the invertebrates and the role they play in the context of the food web and how their association is with the other groups of organisms, namely the vertebrates and the microorganisms. So guys, this is quite a good illustration to look at that interrelatedness, but let's look at some of the key concepts that we're discussing today. So what are the key concepts that we're looking at? I'm going to go through this very quickly. So we're going to look at invertebrates, and we said that these are the unsung heroes from the ecosystem. Why unsung? Because they're very inconspicuous. We don't see them, but yet, guys, they play a significant role in supporting life, and we're going to discuss that role. So we regard them as the unsung heroes, not to be seen, but they do a lot of the hard work in the background. So quite a significant role that they play. When people think of invertebrates, they think of garden pest, agricultural pest, which eat crop and flowers, and we need to address that today. And yes, as I said, that there are some pests, but not all of them are pests. We're going to look at how important it is to have invertebrates in our gardens, and that is a sign of biodiversity, and it indicates a richness of the ecosystem and the variety of organisms that live there. And again, we want to encourage gardens, we want to encourage you to have more invertebrates in your garden, more worms in your garden. We're going to need to look at the significance of them being there. However, guys, pests receive the disproportionate amount of attention when we consider that a vast majority of the invertebrates are actually very important to the biodiversity and the ecosystem in some way that actually goes by unnoticed. And as I said, we've got to look at their significance in contributing to the biodiversity of an ecosystem. If they are important to the ecosystem, then ultimately invertebrates are important to humans, because we depend on a healthy environment for us to survive, good health and well-being. And essentially what this says is that no matter where they are positioned along the ecosystem, without the invertebrates, human existence will be affected. And that's quite a significant point to mention. So what I'm going to do is, having said that, we're going to go for a short break, guys. I want you guys to unwind, get some water, get back refreshed so we can get into the key concepts in detail. Welcome back, guys. I hope you're refreshed. Let's get straight into the main concepts of this lesson. So why are invertebrates important to humans and the ecosystem? So guys, here are 5 reasons. So what I'm going to go through them, I'm going to go through them very quickly. I'm going to give you a minute to have a quick discussion with one of your friends. Take one of these topics and look at them, discuss them, and then we're going to get a detailed breakdown of these. So what do I want you to look at? I want you to discuss very quickly, what is pollination? How do invertebrates play an important role as food for other species? What is pest control? How do invertebrates play an important role in as decomposers and cleaners of the environment? And then finally, how do invertebrates play an important role in the aeration of soil and the creators of soil? So guys, I want you guys to take one of these, have a quick discussion, and when we get back at the end of a minute, we'll have a detailed breakdown of each one of this. Welcome back, guys. So I'm sure you enjoyed the discussion. Let's get straight into these key concepts. Cool. So I'd ask some of you to look. So some of you would have looked at what is pollination. So guys, I think you guys would look around. You would have seen, especially in spring, when we find lots of the flowers blossoming and blooming, we find that there are lots of insects in the air. You would notice that there's bees always hovering around plants. So what is this? Why are they important? So what is pollination? So as I referred to earlier on, pollination is the transfer of pollen from the anther of the flower to the stigma of the same flower or another flower. So essentially what we're saying is that it could be self-pollination or cross-pollination if it goes to another flower. Pollination is a prerequisite for fertilization. Essentially what we're saying is that if pollination does not occur, fertilization does not occur. So it is the fusion of the nuclei from the pollen grain and the nuclei from in the ovule. Fertilization allows for the flower to develop seeds, and that is ultimately very important. So I'm just going to focus on this here, and I need to highlight this: to develop seeds. And guys, I think we need to take a little pause on that, and I want to have a quick discussion with you guys regarding why are seeds important. So guys, if you look at any fruit, when you consume a fruit is actually a part of a flower that has been fertilized. It's very important for us to understand that a process of fertilization has to happen. If fertilization does not happen, the ovule does not develop into a fruit or a fruiting body. And that fruiting body is actually a reproductive structure of the plant, which is capable of growing into a new plant. However, we as humans rely on the seed as a source of food. So if you think about whatever we consume, the nuts, the grains, all have been fertilized during the process of fertilization. And essentially what I'm saying is that if the process of pollination was to stop, it would mean that we would not have fertilized seeds and we would not have fertilized flowers. That means no seeds would develop. And you guys can look around and think about what would happen if we did not have seeds. So think about the seeds that are essential to us. Would we have wheat? No, guys. Would we have rice? No. Would we have mealies? No. Would we have the fruit? No, because in order for fruit to grow, in order for the apple to grow, it needs to be, the flower of that apple needs to have been fertilized. And hence, here we're seeing a potential problem. And we're seeing the significance of these pollinators to the survival of humans, both from a source of food as well as to sustain an ecosystem, and hence important from a biodiversity perspective. So let's look at this. So here we're seeing a host of different, we know that the common pollinators are bees. We also know that butterflies do visit flowers. There are a whole host of your invertebrates that are capable of flying, especially your arthropods that play a significant role. And here guys, we're seeing the bee here visiting a flower, and then along its body you'll find that it's going to rub off some of the unripe pollen onto the body of this, and then it's going to visit another flower and it's going to transfer the pollen onto the stigma, and that's going to then, the pollen's going to travel down this, the pollen's going to travel down, and then it's going to enter into the ovule and fertilize. And this little structure there then gives rise to a seed. So I'm sure you guys would have seen a cross section of an apple, and you've already obviously eaten an apple. Guys, if you look at the apple, and those are the seeds in the middle, those seeds are actually fertilized ovules. The ovules have been fertilized. So this is a reproductive structure. If the process of fertilization did not happen, we would not have fruit. So essentially we're looking at how important your invertebrates are to sustain us, human survival from a food perspective. So if you look at bees, wasps, butterflies, flies, and a whole host of other important pollinating insects, they turn flowers into food, and that's very important, in the form of fruit, nuts, berries, seeds for humans, birds, animals, and also other invertebrates. So we are not seeing them doing this just for humans, it's done for other animals, birds, as well as other invertebrates. I've got some interesting information for you guys and I want you guys to ponder around this. So I'm sure you guys recognized this feature, Albert Einstein, and he said that if the bees disappeared from the surface of the globe, then man will only have 4 years of life left, And what does he mean by this? So if we take out all the pollinators, especially bees, from the ecosystem, we're going to find that plants will not be pollinated, especially your food plants. If we lack pollinators, it means that in a cycle of 4 years, plants are not going to produce seeds, we're not going to have more plants growing, and hence through that process of eliminating the pollinators, we actually it'll lead to the elimination of food, and hence the existence of humans and even other life forms. And hence, guys, when you do see bees, when you do see pollinators, think about how important they are, because they're actually sustaining human life. So quite a significant importance that we tend to overlook, but here's a reason for us to acknowledge them next time. Cool. Let's go on to the next. Again, guys, food for other species. We know that when we dine out, we often eat some of the most sumptuous meals, and lots of those meals come from your invertebrates. And here's a platter that you would have probably ordered at one of your famous fish outlets or franchises, and you'd see that it's made up of prawns, it's made up of mussels, it's made up of oysters. And I know that I'm tempting you guys now to get a bit hungry at school, but I'm sure you're going to have a break soon. But look at the existence of humans. We rely on this. Lots of farmers, lots of the economy of many countries are driven by the harvesting of fish and the sales from that. So again, apart from just a source of food, they also sustain us from an income perspective. Guys, the famous mopane worms, and you guys, some of you would have tried this, quite a delicacy. I haven't. I'm looking forward to trying some of them, and they can be eaten both cooked, raw, high in protein content, essential part, and it's been something that we've consumed for years. It's been part of our traditional and cultural heritage. Again, guys, acknowledging the importance of these invertebrates is essential. So cool. Pest control. It's worth noting that whilst a small minority of invertebrates are regarded as pests, many invertebrate species helpfully eat those pests given half a chance. Common wasp species, as well as lacewings, various beetles, and ladybugs are brilliant helpers in the garden. So guys, I want you guys to look at this notice. It's quite an important notice to take note of. Before you spray or squish an insect, remember guys, 999 out of every 1,000 insects is actually beneficial or harmless. So what does that mean? It means that most of the invertebrates that we do see in our gardens play a significant role, and hence we shouldn't be looking at methods of controlling them using pesticides. We should be looking at encouraging them to visit the plants, to actually pollinate and create variety. Having said that, we still need to acknowledge that they are pests, and that we need to look at processes like biological control, rather use biological control mechanisms, introduce a natural prey to those. So ladybirds are excellent at consuming and eating and keeping the aphid populations down. So maybe introduce some aphids into your garden. Commercially, agriculturally, I know we're driven by profits, and hence farmers tend to use large-scale pesticides, and that is more of a non-selective method of controlling the pest, and hence they destroy both the good pest and the bad pest, and essentially their motivation is driven by the profit line. However guys, you've got to take a conscious decision around looking after the environment. So use alternative methods, introduce a biological pest control mechanism. Okay, so something that we need to consider as well. Decomposers and cleaners. As we said, your invertebrates play a significant role in controlling the environment, the cleanliness of the environment, as well as decomposing other dead organic matter. So some invertebrates help to clear up and clean the environment by eating away fungi and bacteria, or decaying dead matter, including things which we would find unpleasant or unhygienic, from rotting animal carcasses, feces, to forest garden leaves that matter, turning it into compost, which helps us nourish the soil. Here we're looking at the significance of these invertebrates in nourishing the soil, and that is done purely by the process of decomposition, where they will decompose. White ants, your termites, they eat through the wood. They have an enzyme that will digest the cellulose, and it will convert that cellulose back into organic material, which goes back into the soil, and hence they continue to to complete the cycle of life and hence nourishing the soil. Thus we say that invertebrates help keep the environment cleaner and tidier. The same is true for the aquatic environments. So guys, let's look at the last concept. We're looking at soil aerators and creators. So essentially what we're looking at is we're looking at how soil can be aerated, as well as how certain invertebrates actually create soil from some of the organic waste that we see. Very similar to how the earthworms function. Some species of invertebrates are brilliant aerators of the soil, as well as in creating it. In other words, invertebrates not only help us to grow food crops through pollination, they also create and maintain the quality of the soil. This is very important in growing and in agriculture, as well as in our gardens. The extensive burrowing by earthworms loosens and aerates the soil and improves soil drainage by creating passageways for air and water. Guys, if you look at the illustration below, here we're seeing a garden that's got a whole lot of radishes growing, and in that you're seeing some of these invertebrates that are burrowing into the ground. And this is very important. Although we might see them as just being worms in the soil, they actually play a very important role. You'll find that they burrow into the soil, and as they do that, they create air pockets, they create drainage facilities in which the soil is softened, it's aerated. So it means that now we have a good gaseous exchange of atmospheric oxygen into the soil, as well as it creates pockets for water to run into so that the roots can grow. It loosens the soil so that there's greater potential for the roots to grow deeper and hence extract the nutrients of the soil. So again, here we're seeing, guys, I'm not too sure if you guys have heard of, this illustration shows an example of how worms are used in a process called vermiculture. And here we're looking at how worms are grown and then they are introduced into the environment. And these earthworms will go and they will fertilize the soil by creating air pockets. They will also help in a process known as the conversion of the organic matter. Here we're seeing an image that shows how your green waste, so your garden waste, your waste from the kitchen has been collected, and in that earthworms have been introduced. And through the process of decomposition, as well as them utilizing the organic matter, they produce fertile soil, well, a mixture of soil and organic waste, which becomes high in organic waste, which becomes high in humus content. And then this is then taken and it's used as a fertilizer to increase the nutritional value of the soil. So guys, we've looked at the key concepts. I want you guys to have a short break. When we get back, we're going to look at some questions and we're going to engage with you. Welcome, guys. You've had a good break. Let's get into the section here, and as we look at the section, we're going to go through some questions. I want you guys to engage with each other. Let's get it interactive. I'm going to work through these, give you a little while, maybe you can work along with me. Multiple choice questions. Cnidarians show what type of body plan? A, asymmetrical, B, radial, C, bilateral. Let's look at the next one. Gaseous exchange for roundworms occurs through A, diffusion, B, lungs, C, gills. Number 3, what type of body plan do sponges have? It's either asymmetrical, B, bilateral, C, radial. Let's look at the next one. Describe nematocysts as A, they are stinging cells which stun a prey, they chill on a beach, how cool. C, they are actual tentacles which dart out and sting their prey. And the fifth one is overall body structures of both roundworms and flatworms show A, 5-part body plan, segmented bodies, 3 tissue layers. Now guys, I know that I've gone through all of these, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and work through with these questions with you. Okay, so I know that I've gone through them, but I think it was important for us to have looked at these and then go through the questions together. Okay, so guys, cnidarians show what type of body plan? So how do we put this into context? So there's 2 parts to this question. We're looking at the group cnidarians and we're looking at the type of body plan. Guys, if you think of cnidarians, which are the examples that come to mind? So if I go back to my presentations from the previous days, the first cnidarian that comes to mind is our friend the sea anemone. Guys, I've just showed that illustration, tried to be creative, but I think when we look at what type of body plan does it show, is it asymmetrical, is it radially, or is it bilateral? If we look at this diagram, guys, if we cut along the diameter of this, we're going to produce several little segments that are mirror images of each other, and hence we refer to this organism or the cnidarians as having radial symmetry. Well done to those of you that got it right. Let's hope you guys get this one right. Number 2, gaseous exchange for roundworms occurs through, guys. So if you look at roundworms, guys, we looked at roundworms and we said that these roundworms basically are elongated worms that have a body structure through which they have a through gut system. Cool, but this is not what the question asks. It needs to know, does gaseous exchange occur through diffusion, lungs, and gills? Guys, lungs is a characteristic that we see on your more evolved vertebrates that live on land, not necessarily, but your mammals. So your larger, more developed vertebrates would have lungs. Gills, so you'll see this would be a characteristic of some of your aquatic organisms that live in water, and they require these gills, and hence it can't be gills either. However, when we look at roundworms, they lack lungs, so they do not have lungs, so they have no lungs. But if you look at their body surface, they have openings on their body surface through which they exchange gases, and that is through diffusion. So it's the diffusion of gases, so they release CO2 and oxygen, and it's through the body surface, and we refer to that process of the exchange of gases as being diffusion. So diffusion is the correct answer there. Number 3, what type of body plans do sponges have? So here we're looking at sponges, and guys, if you compare cnidarians, which was the second group, the sponges were the first group of organisms, and we noticed that these were sponges that had arrangements on rocks, that they were attached onto rocks. And guys, if you looked at them, you would notice that they lacked a distinct axis of symmetry. If you try to draw a line along any plane, they would not be able to cut the organism into identical halves, and hence we refer to them as being asymmetrical. Cool. Let's see. So here we're looking at nematocyst, described as, so guys, the word nematocyst, when you see the word nematocyst, what does come to mind? For me, the word nematocyst reminds me of cells that are capable of stinging, and hence these are stinging cells which stun a prey, and that is seen in the hydra, and it's a characteristic of the hydra. It would be awesome if they could chill on the beach, but that would not be correct. There are actual tentacles which dart out and sting a prey. Well guys, if the tentacles were darting out to sting a prey, that would not be a nematocyst or a sting cell. Okay, so we're not looking, so it's neither that nor that, but however it is the sting cells. Let's look at the last one. Overall body structures of both roundworms and flatworms show 5-part body plan. Head, neck, thorax, tail. No guys, that's not correct. They show segmented bodies, possibly, or they show 3 tissue layers. Guys, if you look at segmentation in your roundworms, no. However, when we look at the body plan of them, they definitely show 3 tissue layers. So they are triploblastic, and we've seen that they show the development of 3 embryonic layers and the specialization of their tissue from a 3 germ layer in the embryo. And hence, the answer here is triploblastic or 3 tissue layers. Cool. So we've spent some time looking at activity 1, which was the multiple choice question. Guys, here we're looking at terminology, and I know that you guys have done this section very well. So I'm gonna very quickly go through these. I'm gonna possibly read these answers out for you, the questions out for you, and then simultaneously work with you to get some of these answers correct. So guys, again, let's look at the most accurate term and the term that best describes, or the term that best fits the description. 2.1. organisms have a single axis of symmetry. Guys, a single axis of symmetry would be referred to as an organism being bilaterally symmetrical. So here we're looking at an organism being bilaterally symmetrical. So that's bilateral symmetry. Cool. Again, a single axis of symmetry. 2.2. The outer layer of cells in embryonic development that give rise to the brain, skin, and nervous system. Guys, we've got three layers. We've got the outer ectoderm, the middle mesoderm, and the inner endoderm. So the layer that's on the outside is the outer ectoderm. And the best way to remember this is, remember, the outer layer is always external, it's outside, it's the ectoderm. Cool. 2.3. Animals that do not or don't have a body cavity. Guys, we looked at organisms that have a true body cavity, organisms that don't have, and organisms that have a false body cavity. And we refer to these organisms that don't have a body cavity as being acoelomic. So organisms that do not have a body cavity are referred to as being acoelomic. Cool. 2.4. The development of a head with sensory organs. Aha. We looked at this some time ago, and I mentioned this at the start of the lesson. We said that when organisms started becoming more evolved, as they became more specialized, we noticed that the development and the concentration of nerves towards the anterior end. And that term, when nerve and sensory organs started developing or forming at the anterior end, we refer to that as a process of cephalization, or the development of a neural cord. So the term we're looking here at is the process called cephalization. You guys need to remember this term. It's quite an important term that you need to carry through this lesson. Organisms that cause disease. Guys, during this lesson we looked at pest, which are organisms that affect plant and other organisms. Here we're looking at an organism that causes disease, and we often know that your pathogens cause disease. So a disease-causing organism is a pathogen that we need to remember. Okay, and it obviously has a pathogenic substance that it produces. Organisms that are fixed in one position. Guys, if we go back to the first group of microinvertebrates that we looked at, it was the porifera sponges. These organisms are fixed on a substrate, and they rely on the movement of the current that brings food towards them, and hence we refer to them as being sessile. Sessile in the sense that not being able to move. Organisms that are carriers of disease. During the study of the life cycles of different organisms, when we looked at in microorganisms, we noticed that there were certain organisms that carry disease but are not affected by that disease, and we refer to them as those organisms that carry disease as being vectors. And a classical example of a vector that we can talk about is the mosquito. And if you've been watching the news recently, there's been an outrage, there's been a world scare around Zika virus, and the Zika virus is basically a pathogen that is carried by a strain of mosquito, and we do not have that mosquito strain or type of mosquito that carries that virus, and hence we in South Africa are somewhat will not have cases of this virus spreading and infecting other people, and that's purely because the vector, which is a strain of the mosquito that is not resident to Africa, is not present in the country. Cool. 2.8. A tube with two openings, one to ingest and the other to eject waste from the body, and that we refer to as a through gut. So organisms that have two openings are referred to as a through gut system. 2.9. Symmetry in animals where the body parts are arranged around a central axis. We just had an example of that, and we refer to that as being radial symmetry. So organisms that have radial symmetry show multiple axes around which they can produce mirror images. 2.10, the last one, the body cavity between the body wall and the digestive system, and that is the coelom. So it's the cavity that is made up between the body wall and the digestive system, and we refer to those organisms as being coelomate. Cool, guys. So what we're going to spend some time is we're going to look at this last question here, but I'm going to give you some time to read the question and have a quick discussion amongst your colleagues before we look at the solution to this. It's a key feature that we need to discuss as a characteristic of all living organisms, not exclusive to just invertebrates. So let's look at this question. Explain the relationship between cell size and surface area to volume ratio in invertebrates by referring to the image below. So guys, let's study that image. Here we're seeing three different cubic structures. Here we're seeing a cubic structure with a dimension of 1, the second one with a dimension of 5, and here we're seeing a similar size, but it contains 5 cubes that each measure 1 unit respectively. So we're seeing these being compared by their total surface area, their volume, and then the surface area to volume ratio of each one of them. When we look at the calculations on this, here we're looking at the surface area of that, and that's calculated by multiplying the length times the breadth, which is 1 times 1, and we add them up to get, so there would be 6 sides, and we add them up, so it's the total of the 6 sides. So it's the total of the length times breadth for each side will give us the total area. So it's the height times the width times the number of sides times 6 will give us the value of the total area. However, when we look at calculating the total volume, it's the height, the width, and the length which are multiplied, which gives you the value. So here we're looking at 5 times 5 times 5, which is 125. So when we look the first one, 1 times 1 times 1 times the breadth, and we're looking at a value of 1 cubic centimeter or unit cubed. So guys, these are then compared to a ratio which is the surface area to volume ratio. So the surface area 6 divided by 1 is 6 here, 150 divided by 125 is 1.2, 750 divided by 125 is 6. So essentially what the question is dealing with is, here we have compared the surface area to volume ratios of 3 different cells or 3 different structures. Here a single cell organism which is extremely small, and the second diagram shows you a single cell, a unicellular organism which is relatively large, and then the last diagram, number 3 here, shows you a similar sized organism but made up of several cells. So what I want you guys to get into a group, have a quick discussion around how the relationship between surface area to volume ratio is evident, and then I'll come back at the end of a minute to wrap up with this discussion. Welcome back, guys. So I'm sure you had a good discussion around the concept of surface area to volume ratio, and this is something that you need to remember all through grade 11 and 12. It's often a concept that comes into the survival and how organisms are better adapted using the surface area to volume ratio. So guys, let's get into looking at the possible solution or answers to this question. So I've put these solutions down and I'm going to read through them essentially to explain to you the significance of surface volume to ratio. Nutrients and waste move across cell surfaces by the process of diffusion. Diffusion works well for small cells but not for large cells, and hence the reason is explained in geometry. And hence if you look at the surface area here, if we rely on the exchange of nutrients across a small surface area, here we've got a surface area to volume ratio which is 6, and hence it would be quite effective. However, if the organism is much larger, the ratio of 1.2 is a significantly smaller ratio, which would essentially mean that this organism would experience difficulty it would not be efficient in using its surface area to volume ratio as a mechanism for diffusion. However, when a cell grows, its rate of metabolism increases. At the same time, does the rate of its volume. This means that the rate of diffusion, which provides the materials for metabolism, must increase proportionately with the cell's growth. However, this can't happen because the cell surface area increases at a much smaller rate than its volume, and hence as an organism increases in size, the ability of it to rely on its surface area for diffusion becomes compromised, and hence it needs to have systems, it needs to have organs to be able to make the process of diffusion much more efficient. So guys, thus cells are small because they can't be large. If a cell is large, it would not exist. It would have to have a big volume requiring lots of nutrients and producing lots of waste. But its surface area would be too small for diffusion to be able to meet the cell's needs, and hence larger organisms have a smaller surface area to volume ratio, and that's established by being extremely small. So guys, hope you enjoyed the lesson. Work smart, work hard, all the best for your exams. See you next week.